The 3rd century AD, which witnessed the collapse of the Kushanas in North India and the Satavahanas in the Deccan, brought in a period of realignment of political forces. Amongst the ruling families were the Guptas, who set up a political structure which, according to some scholars, have all the attributes of an empire. In the writings of early Indian history in general, there is a supposed correlation between such a state structure and its social, economic, and cultural development. Considering their varied achievements, scholars have asserted that the Gupta age was a golden age in Indian history, a concept which is now debated, and in these 2 programs, an attempt is being made to highlight the major socio-economic changes that came about in the life of the common man during this period.
Like all the other ages that we have already studied, the sources include the superb quality coins of the Guptas, the epigraphs, the most important being the Allahabad Pillar Prashasti of Samudragupta, and the various specimens of art manifested in the architecture, sculpture, and paintings. Literature includes works of eminent personalities like Shudraka and Kalidas, the Monimukhalai and the Silapadikaram, and all the various foreign sources, including works of Chinese pilgrims who visited India, mainly to explore the condition of Buddhism in their times.
In this period, that is towards the end of the Gupta period, we find a new system was coming up in the socio-economic fabric of the country, that is the growth of the Agraja system. The Agraja system was actually a system by which donations were made to the religious institutions. It could be a monastery of the Buddhists or of the Jains. It could be a Brahmanical place of worship, and the donation was normally made by an individual person, not by the royal authority. But the endorsement or the consent of the royal authority was necessary. And we find that this practice was quite prevalent in the 4th and the 5th centuries, although it had its beginning in the 1st and the 2nd century in South India during the Satavahana period. Why did this Agraja system come up, one might question. The state gradually found that, as it has been described in the Puranas and the epics, that in the Kali Yuga, the classes or castes who were assigned their respective duties would not do it, and it would be difficult to handle them by the king, and they wouldn't pay their taxes. So therefore, the king, in order to relinquish some of his financial or fiscal duties, he would make grants of land for the military activities or for the payment to the Brahmins. Especially first, this was started by way of paying the Brahman, and then it was extended to the military officials as well. And while these land grants were made, it was not only that the land was parted with, along with this, the king parted with his administrative functions, his executive functions, and even his police functions. So we find that a new class of intermediaries were coming up who would be handling these functions which were earlier being managed by the king and his organization. The study of the Agraja system is also very interesting from another point of view, because it was in a way indicative of a social revolution that was taking place. As we have already said, that the Puranas and earlier the epics had described that in the Kali Yuga, the Shudras and the Vaishyas will not do their duties and not conform to their caste expectations. And this happened because there was a tremendous increase in the volume of trade, and this trade was conducted by the Vaishyas and the Shudras. There was also a great agricultural input, and in this input the Shudras had a very important role to play. So we find that there was a clash between the ritual status and the actual status. While ritually they were considered inferior, in the actual field we find that they were amassing a sizable part of wealth, and naturally they became the votaries of the religious systems which spoke of a casteless society like Buddhism or Jainism. So therefore, through their, as an expression of their dedication, as an expression of their support to these religions, they made these donations to these religious orders, and sometimes of course donations were also made by those traders who were devotees of Brahmanical deities. One might ask, how did the people who came under the new system fared? The sources that we have in hand, they indicate that oppression definitely went up under these new masters. There was more pressures for exaction of more taxes, and we find that the forced labor or vishti, that also increased. Vishti became a regular feature in the Gupta period. Also, it had been known for a long time in India, even from the Mauryan period. We never had the kind of slavery which was institutionalized in the western part of the world, but Vishti was definitely a system which made the society less egalitarian than one would expect in the Gupta period.
Having discussed about the Agraha system, let us now look at the types of land that existed during this period. In this context, we are reminded of the references to the types of land in the various copper plates unearthed from different regions of Bengal, assignable to the 5th and the 6th centuries AD. Herein, apart from distinguishing cultivable land or kshetra or vapakshetra from habitational plots or vastu, and forests or aranya as they are sometimes called, there are indications to land that was kept fallow called khila. These sometimes further qualified as aprahata, meaning land that has never been tilled before, adyastamba or land covered with original shrubs and bushes, or never cleared before, aprada or unyielding land, and apratikara, upratikara, and sunya pratikara, meaning land that does not produce any revenue. Akhila Kshetra indicates arable land now kept fallow. The 12 copper plates from Bengal also provide information about the system of measurement of land. The sizes of the plots were indicated in terms of Adha Vapa, Drona Vapa, and Kolya Vapa. The term Vapa, originating in the root Vap, means the sowing of seeds in a field. When prefixed with the terms Adha, Drona, and Kulya, it refers, probably, to the seed-bearing capacity of the soil. The same grants also refer to the use of two rods or nalas at the time of demarcating a plot when it is finally transferred to the donee. The rods or nalas must have been used for the linear measurement of the plot. Brahmanas, Buddhist viharas, Jaina basadis, and other religious institutions were the main beneficiaries during this changing time. In 507 AD, in Samatata, 11 pitakas of land divided into 5 separate plots was donated to a Buddhist vihara. In the Vakataka realm, the sizes of plots varied from as meager as 12 nivarthanas to as large as 8,000 nivarthanas. In one instance, a large area of 2,000 nivarthanas was donated only to 4 Brahmins. The Vakatakas donated mostly land or villages to the Brahmin priests. As the grantees were on most occasions religious institutions and personages, the Brahmins became the most prominent owners of land. This led to an increase in their material conditions, their status, and their prestige. A 6th century copper plate from ancient Samatata area shows the non-Brahmin villagers like the carpenter or Vardhaki and the mechanic or Vilala owned arable land and ponds.
Agriculture is not possible without making provisions for irrigation. In Bengal, with easy availability of water, there was no need for artificial irrigation. But we find grandiose schemes of irrigation system executed under royal patronage. The first that we can mention is the one built by Prithvishen II of the Nandivarman branch of the Vakatakas. The Setu excavated by him, the Setu means irrigation project here, excavated by him is named Prithvi Samudra. It is obviously named after the ruling king, and the epithet Samudra indicates its impressive size. But we find supra-level irrigation projects being executed by kings. Especially, most famous is the Sudarshan project, the ruins of which have been found in Ginnar in Kathiawar. The history spans from the 4th century BC, when it was excavated by Chandragupta Maurya. Then again, it was improved upon by King Ashok subsequently. In 150 AD, we find Rudradaman once again repairing it because it was damaged by a storm. And again, during the Gupta period, we find that it was repaired once again by Skandagupta's provincial governors in Saurashtra because it was once again damaged by a storm. So, this impressive irrigation system being provided for by royal patronage indicates that importance was given to the agrarian sector of the economy. Subsequently, we find many other projects being named after their illustrious counterpart in Kathiawar. Especially one is mentioned in the Ramtek inscription, where Queen Prabhavati Gupta excavates a tank named Sudarshan and dedicates it to the temple.
Along with agriculture, the non-agrarian sector of the economy also flourished. Skilled craftsmen working through their guilds produced good quality ceramics, artifacts, jewelry, textiles, and ivory carvings. But the essential technology of the Gupta period lay in metalwork on copper and iron. A 7th century bronze statue of the Buddha, weighing 1 ton, found in the ruins of a Buddhist monastery at Sultanganj in Bihar in 1864 and now housed in the Birmingham Museum, is the finest example of copper metalwork that began during this period. The Iron Pillar of Delhi, showing no signs of rust and erosion, is also a very good example of iron technology during the Gupta period. And for many centuries, excepting China, India led the world in metal technology.
Another new feature that came up in the economic and professional activities of the society was the growth of the guild, which was known as the Sreni or at times as the Nigama. Then what was the Sreni or the Nigama? This was an organization of the craftsmen. We know that in ancient India, craft also did very well, and there was a variety of crafts, and there was a rising international demand for merchandise provided and produced by the Indian craftsmen. So this needed a much more professional organization, much more professional handling of the entire process. And we find that different groups of artisans came to be organized under different guilds. And what is very interesting about this, that we did not have formal training schools for these craftsmen, but that was provided by the guild itself. And it is also interesting to note that there was a lot of competition among these guilds, and the trade secrets or the manufacturing secrets were closely guarded and kept shut to the other group. And we find that this group, since this merchandise had to be sold across the country, we find that the Srishti or the money lender or one who invested in these crafts, they had to club together with a number of other people in other professions.
Clay seals have been discovered from Basar, which I refer to a Sanskrit term which is mentioned therein, Shreshti Shatavaha Kulika Nigam, probably indicates an umbrella organization embracing organizations of merchants, artisans, and caravan traders. In a 4th century inscription from Nasik, we find reference to a potter's guild or the Kulorika Nigam. There are other guilds referred to, like in the Mandsaur inscription of Kumargupta I and Buddhagupta, we find a reference to a guild of silk weavers.
So this way, guild became a much more organized commercial organization than we can think of even in those days of the distant past, and the importance of these can be felt from the fact that the head of the artisans, the head of the caravan trader, the Sreshti himself, and sometimes the scribes who kept the records, or they were all represented in the local administration of the Gupta period.
One point that we must remember herein is that the Shastrakas mentioned mentions that the guild laws were as important as the laws of the land, and the kings should take cognizance of their laws. And we find that they were in fact ruled by their own laws until and unless it threatened the security of the country.
No doubt that these guilds provided the expertise and the perfection in the commodities that were produced, but we also find that members of the guilds changing their profession, changing their crafts. We have one whole guild of silk weavers who come away from the coastal region of Western India and settle in Mandasur, and they change their profession totally. Some of them become storytellers, some of them become swordsmen, and one can try to probe what was the reason. Was there a decline, sudden decline in a certain commodity? Was there any upset in the Western trade that forced them to change their professions? This kind of change of profession was not at all favored by the Smritis or the Shastras controlling the guilds, and they also even wanted an intermediary, a madhyastha, to settle these matters and to sort of stop these major upsets in the guild system. Another key argument which is associated with the economic activities of the Gupta Empire in its period of decline, that there was a decline in the urban centers, that the cities which had been growing up in the phase of the second urbanization of India, going back to the 6th century BC and coming up to the 4th century, that many cities which had developed during this long period of almost 1000 years, they were on the decline, and this decline is an indication of the decline in trade, especially Roman trade, that the cities were so dependent on Roman trade and they were all dotted along the line which led to the Roman trade, that urban decay becomes a very important factor, that society was becoming fragmented into self-sufficient village economy. Well, historians are now divided in their opinions regarding this process of urban decay and the key role which was played by Roman trade in the Gupta period. They argue that the volume of the Roman trade was never so great as it has been imagined by earlier historians, that when that Roman trade declined, with the decline of Rome, Indian cities also fell into the rut and there was a decline. Of course, we find that many of the fine cities which were there in the Kushan period and even earlier, like Allahabad or Kosambi, like Ujjain, like Mathura, or even our very old Banaras, showed their structure showed signs of decay, that there was less revenue generated from these places, that there was less money being invested by the traders in these places. We cannot totally rule out this question of urban decay, but what we must remember, that some of the cities surely lost their pristine place in this declining phase of the Gupta Empire, but other cities were coming up. Trade was changing dimensions. There was a great surplus in some places in agricultural produce, and that led to a different kind of trade. So we find that in northern India, when some cities showed some signs of decay, that was made good by the cities which came up in other parts of the country, especially in the south. In Gujarat, cities were coming up. In the Satavahana Empire, the cities were coming up. In the eastern Deccan, new cities were coming up. In the western coast, new cities were coming up. So and apart from this, we have the literary evidences of very important works like Vatsayana's Kama Sutra. We have the Mrichakatikam of Shudraka, and they talk of a very, very advanced estate, urban life, sophisticated urban life. Had there been any such great decline in urban trade and corresponding decline in the cities, that kind of high urban culture could not have come up unless there were patrons, unless there were clients in all these different fields. Definitely Faxian and Huinsang, they are our great sources to talk about this urban center, decline of the urban centers. We cannot rule them out, but at the same time, we must not limit our focus to these cities which came up in the second phase, but we must turn our attention and our focus to other areas where different kinds of trade and different kinds of cities were coming up. We must point out to Arikamedu, which was a very important city in southern India, for instance.
In this program, an attempt has been made to look at the lives of the common people during late ancient India. We have discussed about the Agraja system and its implications, the system of land measurement and demarcation of plots, the irrigation system, craft and mercantile organizations. We have also spoken of the non-agrarian sector of the economy and conferred the causes and effects of urbanization. In the coming episode on the same topic, we shall dwell mostly on trade and commerce and also touch upon the social changes that affected very greatly the lives of the common people.